Good morning. Welcome and thank you for joining the 2020 Teacher Leader Summit virtual series. My name is Christina and I will be your session moderator. We ask that participants keep microphones and videos off for the remainder of the session unless specifically asked to turn them on from a presenter or if you're participating in a breakout room. You are attending session A009, Identifying and Supporting Students with Interrupted Formal Education, SIFEs. Allow me to introduce our presenter today, Alice Garcia.
Hi everyone, thanks for being here. As Christina said, my name is Alice Garcia and I am the EL program coordinator for Louisiana. I've been in this position for about 8 months, but I've been with the department for almost 3 years. So let's go ahead and get started. Christina will be monitoring the chat to kind of let me know if there's something that I need to address. If not, you will have my contact information. And hopefully a lot of you on here already know me. I know that I'm pretty good about responding to your questions as quickly as I can. But if you do have something pressing and we think we can address it during this presentation, we'll go ahead and do that. So let me see if I can get things rolling. There we go. So today we're going to talk about identifying and supporting students with interrupted formal education, or SIFEs. Sometimes they're also called SLIFEs, which basically just means students with limited or interrupted formal education. In Louisiana, we're choosing to use the acronym SIFE, but pretty much all SLIFE and SIFE are interchangeable. The feds interchange them as well. Today's objectives are that we are going to review the criteria to identify a student with interrupted formal education and discuss the ways to support them. At the moment, we are working with the creators of our new school, or is it student information system, I believe it's called EduLink or EdLink, to include SIFEs as a student identifier. It is also presently available as an identifier in TIDE. So those of you who are going in and entering new students into TIDE, you see it down there when they ask for, like, is a student in EL? I can't remember, I think one of the other questions they ask you is either if the student is a migrant or if they are homeless. It's one of those other questions that's in TIDE. It's like to the right, and there is actually a SIFE one on there. So you can, at this point, start clicking on that if you find that it is going, if you have noticed that the student meets the criteria, okay? Before we begin adding the, let's see. There we go. Sorry. The thing's moving really slow on my side, even though I've picked a really good internet, but it's still moving very, very slow. Okay, there we go. Okay, before we begin editing the identifier though, we need to look at the specific criteria that we have come up with. So this term has been in use, SIFE or SLIFE has been used nationally by various states and by the federal government, but the feds do leave it up to the states to come up with specific criteria. And so in Louisiana, the department, and we've discussed it with some stakeholders as well, we've come up with a specific criteria that a student must meet in order to be identified as a SIFE. So we're not identifying, of course, every student. They have to meet a very specific criteria, and we're going to review that. Before we do, of course, is, well, actually, no. When should a student be identified as a SIFE? First, they must be identified as an English learner. So SIFEs, this term is only applicable to English learners. Yes, we do have some students who are non-ELs who probably meet this criteria. To be honest with you, I definitely did, just because of different situations in my own life. So I think that's partly why I'm so passionate about this population, is because I would have met this criteria other than I was a bilingual child, not an English learner. So, but I pretty much all met a lot of the other things here. So they must be 13 or older. The majority of the students that you're going to enroll that are going to meet this criteria are going to be older, and they'll be rolling into high school. They need to have some evidence of 2 or more years of interrupted formal education in their native country. This is where it gets a little tricky, because to find this out, you can review their records if they have any, which the majority of the time they won't, but that's okay. Sometimes they do. You can also get it by talking to the parents. You can talk to the student. Usually if a student has been in school regularly, they'll do everything they can to get those records to you. It may take a very long time. I know I waited a year to get records one time for a student from Honduras. And then when I finally did get them, we adjusted her schedule, because when we scheduled her initially, we had to do it based on the fact that she was 16, 17 years old and had no previous records. So we basically had to start her in 9th grade with everything, brand new. But once I got her records, I was able to adjust everything and kind of make her, I think she became equal to about a late junior at that point. But it took a year and a lot of phone calls and talking to various family members to try to get those records. But when we finally did, it was a pretty big deal. But she kept telling me over and over again, I've been in school, I've been in school, I've been in school. And I'd be like, okay, Mija, I need to see your records. I can't just take your word for it. I need something. So we were able to get those, but a lot of times you won't be able to. And with some students, particularly if they're coming as refugees, I dealt with this a lot from students from Iraq or Syria, various other countries who were declaring political asylum. We could not even contact their native countries to try to get those records. It was actually a thing of safety for them, security. So we could not contact them. So with those students, I did have to enroll them in 9th grade, even if they did tell me, hey, I have been in school. I simply couldn't get those records and contact their previous schools because they didn't want anybody to know where they were. The last step, and this one may not be possible for all students, but it is kind of it's a great tool, and you can collect some amazingly good information if you can do this. So you want to try to assess their reading and mathematics levels, because you want to see if they are 2 or more grade levels behind in reading and math. Now we do have at the state, we do have state placement tests available in mathematics, in Spanish, in 4th grade and in 8th grade. Okay, so that kind of hits the range. So let's say you are enrolling a student into high school, you would use that 8th grade placement test. And if they aren't able to access it, do anything with it, that's going to let you know that more than likely they are several years behind in math. Now reading, there are some options, because you want to assess their reading in their native language. If you're able to assess them with reading in English, then that's awesome, because they've probably gone to a bilingual school or have had some sort of exposure to English to be able to do that test. And then you're dealing with a whole other sort of circumstances, and life has just become a lot easier. So if that is the case, good to go. But more than likely, they're coming in with very little English because they've already been identified as an English learner. And you're wanting to know, hey, are they even literate? Do they have any literacy skills in their native language? So there are a couple options. The World Language Team has put together a compendium that is a list that lists some some tests that you can use to assess their language proficiency, a little bit of their literacy. Some of these tests are called Apple, Stamp. There'll be a link to their compendium at the end of this presentation, and also it is available in my SIFE one-pager that is on this presentation and available on the English Learner website. Also, the American Reading Company has a test called the ANEEL, and I'll show you guys the book that goes with that. This right here. This test, I literally just got to preview it yesterday and look at the reports and everything like that. This is a really good test because it is applicable for K through 12, and the student would take it in Spanish, and you would be able to at least assess if they're at grade level. So it's not really like an accelerator reader kind of test where they're gonna take it and then you're gonna be able to say, oh, they're at 3rd grade. No, you would actually get a student, look at their age, look at their experience. Like let's say it's a 15, 16-year-old potential SIFE enrolling. You might give them the 9th grade test or the 8th grade test and see if they are reading at that level. And if not, it's going to let you know, they're reading actually at a 3rd grade level or at a 5th grade level. But you do kind of have to start at a level that you think where they should be. But the test itself is very good. There is some training that needs to be done in order to administer, and then a little bit of PD that has to be done in order to understand how to read the report. But at least this gives you some information, because as you know, if the student has literacy skills in their native language, then you're just going to be really focusing on transferring that skill over. If they cannot read in their native language, then really you're going to be having to work on a lot of those foundational skills. And so that lets you know that this student needs an additional level of support beyond just language. So this is really important information. And I'll be honest with you, most of the SIFEs that I've worked with needed that additional support, particularly if they were coming from Mexico, Central America, some African countries as well. They would need some of those literacy skills. But then I would also have ones who were able to go to school, at least in the lower grades. And so they had some of that in their native language. And because they had that foundation, it was just building on it and transferring it over. So that made things a little bit easier. But if not, it's just about knowing how to support them, okay? So why might a student have their formal education be interrupted? So basically, why do we have SIFEs? In order to answer this question, we must understand why a student's education has been interrupted. In a lot of these countries that they're coming from, schooling is not closely regulated. It is not, it's not like the law for them to go there. Even if it is, a lot of times they show up and they don't have any teachers, or the schools are closed because of protests or violence or various other different reasons. So even if you have students who are coming in who lived in a country where, say, it's obligatory for them to go to school until 6th grade, they don't necessarily all have had the same experience. It will vary greatly. As noted, many countries only require education up to 6th grade. Some do go all the way up to 9th. Mexico is one where they usually do provide, I'll say, free education up to 9th grade, which is their last year of secundaria. So it's important to kind of be aware of that, because if you've ever taken Spanish class, you probably think, you know, when we talk about la escuela secundaria, you're thinking it's high school. It's actually 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. And anything beyond that becomes either preparatoria or colegio or something like that. They call it different names. But those are typically something they have to pay for. So that is why a lot of students coming from Mexico will not have schooling beyond 9th grade, sometimes not even beyond 6th grade. In a lot of the Central American countries, it's only 6th grade. Some other countries as well, it's only 6th grade. So that's one big reason why we have students with interrupted formal education. It's simply not available. It's not obligatory. It isn't the norm. A lot of students are coming from war-torn or very remote areas and may have never attended school. They may be coming from the mountains of Vietnam or a mountain on top of Guatemala, where if they're lucky, they may have had a mission school, but even then, they were probably only receiving very, very minimal education. They may be coming from a refugee camp. I had a student one time who basically was born in a refugee camp and lived in a refugee camp in Kenya for 14 years. And so he had never formally attended school. He only received whatever some of the volunteers would teach him whenever they were there. So that kind of, and then if they're coming in and being detained in one of the detention camps here in the United States, again, more than likely it's a volunteer, somebody like that, who's kind of just giving them some of the basic skills. It's not like a formal education. However, once they move to the United States, and if they are under the age of 18, they are legally obligated to enroll in school or an adult education program. This can be pretty eye-opening for a lot of students because that has not been the case in their country. And so they kind of don't know what to do about it. They're like, what do you mean I have to go to school? I came here to work, or I came here to do all these different things. Though I will say the majority of them are kind of excited about the opportunity to go to school and to learn and to kind of have these experiences that they may have only heard about or may have seen on TV. And so many of them are kind of excited about it until they realize how much of a commitment it is. But that's okay. You're going to work on making them feel comfortable and making them feel welcome. But I really want you to understand that for most of these students, it wasn't a choice for them to drop out. They simply weren't able to complete their education because it wasn't available to them, or they were dealing with such violence and various other different things, such as a lot of our students coming from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. If they go to school, they're dealing with possibly being recruited into a gang or having to traffic drugs or whatever, and so they just don't want to go. It's too scary. So I just kind of want you to be aware of that for most of them, it's not a choice, that they did not finish their education. So give them that benefit of the doubt and say, okay, you're here now. This is how we roll in the United States. We're going to help you. You're going to wind up loving school, and we're going to get you educated, and you're going to learn English. Why is it important to accurately identify SIFEs? They're estimated to make up about 10 to 20% of our current EL population, which is about 29,000. So our current EL population in Louisiana is about 29,000 students. So we're estimating anywhere between 10 to 20%. So 3,000 to 6,000 of our Ls are SIFEs. But because up until now, we have not had a specific definition for them or a way to track who they are, we haven't been able to collect that data. But that's probably why I'm doing this presentation and why we've established this, so that way we can start getting that data, getting that information and tracking these students and just kind of being aware of who they are, so we can make sure we're providing that additional supplemental instruction to address unfinished learning, because we want them to be able to access age-appropriate, high-quality curriculum and instruction. Also, these students typically represent some of our highest at-risk students. Nationally, they say about 70% of SIFEs drop out of school before reaching graduation. We aren't able to tell you what that is in Louisiana because we have not been able to accurately track who these students are in this state. But now that we have the definition and we'll have a system to do it, we're hoping that, in the next couple of years, we'll be able to say what percentage of our SIFEs are dropping out. And hopefully what we'll see is that that dropout rate will gradually decline as we're more aware of who they are and how to better support them. So that's kind of what we're looking at doing by identifying these students and tracking them and knowing what kinds of additional supports, if any, that they need. Okay, so we're going to do a quick poll here. So based on these identifiers, do you have or have you had SIFEs enroll in your school settings? Okay, so there's a poll that has just popped up. Yes or no? Wow, look at those yeses coming in. And that's what we were thinking, to be honest with you. It's what we were thinking and why we felt very strongly. Yeah, and I see some of you answering in the chat. Thank you. Make sure you also put it in the poll. The poll does say, have you ever heard, but really it's, do you think you have them being enrolled? I mean, those of you working in some of the younger grades, you may not have as many of these students, especially now that we've established the criteria of them being 13 or older. But you can at least be aware of if you are enrolling students, even in those younger grades, particularly in 4th or 5th grade, that have never been in school. I do hear a lot about those, where you do have students who are enrolling in those grades and have never gone to school. Okay, so about 58% of you have said that, yes, you're aware of the term or that you have enrolled who you think are SIFEs into your schools. So that's pretty good. Some of you are saying no, maybe because you didn't know who they were, as in you didn't know, if I said that term to you, what it actually meant or what the criteria was, or you're working in some of the younger grades. Like I said, it's harder to identify these kids in the younger grades. And the reason we don't go, oh, thank you. The reason we don't go that young is because a lot of times if they are enrolling into those younger grades, we still have enough time to catch them up. It's when we start getting them into our later middle and high school that we're really faced with the challenge of trying to get them caught up with their peers so that way they can graduate on time, more or less, or at least meet the requirements needed for graduation. We're going to talk more about that in just a minute. Okay. Good to know about the Chromebooks. All right, go ahead and move on. So now we're going to talk about supporting SIFEs and some of the common obstacles that we may face as we look to support them. And a lot of these are going to look familiar if you have a lot of ELs, particularly older ELs in your school system already. A lot of these you're going to say, oh, I've been dealing with that problem already. And that's good because possibly you already have some solutions, but we're going to talk about what they are. So what if a student arrives with no records of any kind? First of all, they're not required. No student technically is required to have things like birth certificates, drop slips, transcripts, or any other documentation of this type to enroll. And I'm still getting calls, I would say, particularly when school is in session. This school is not allowing students to enroll because they don't have birth certificates. This is something that comes from the Department of Justice. There's a link here. It explains what kinds of options, other kinds of documentation they can use besides a birth certificate or a drop slip or anything like that. There are different things that they can use. All sorts of interesting pieces, like a photocopy of a family Bible saying when a child was born. The most common thing I've used when I couldn't get a birth certificate was a letter from a doctor. So I would send a student to get their vaccinations, and then I would get a letter from the doctor telling me their estimated age. That was probably the most common thing that I would receive. If a student is coming in from a detention center or a refugee camp or something like that, they're probably going to have documentation that estimates how old they are, and various other things. If they're coming in through the detention centers here in the United States, they usually come with a really big, thick packet that gives you like their health history, all sorts of scary information in there, but it comes with very thorough information, especially if they're trying to claim asylum and be identified as a refugee. There'll be a lot of paperwork on them. But the good thing is if you get those students, you'll at least have an estimate of what their age is. So then that way you can kind of place them according to age. And remember, students age 18 or younger must be enrolled in school or an equivalent program. This is very important. Please do not be turning these students away. Do not be sending them directly to an adult ed program until you've had some conversations with them, okay? And then we always look at grade placement according to their age, okay? And so that's why we do need some sort of estimate of what their age is, so that way we can make sure we are placing them accordingly. And I'll tell you a story in a little bit about where we had like a little bit of an influx of students from Iraq, and most of them, their documentation was not accurate, but we had to basically accept what they were giving us, even though we later learned that they were much older than their documentation was claiming. But we'll talk about that later. So high school age students may start in grade 9 or our transitional 9 or T9. And there's there's some policy that is out there for T9 or grade 9 placement. For basically ELs, if they're coming in from another country, they basically can just be placed into it. There's no longer a seat time requirement or assessment scores or anything like that. There's none of that needed if that is what you choose to do. You just do want to talk to a student and let them know that they've just been placed into basically a 5-year high school program. Some are fine with that, but some might be like, no, that's not what I want, or I'm not planning on sticking around for that many years. And that's why you need to have those kinds of conversations. Okay? LDOE does have some guidance. If you can't find it, feel free to email me and I'll send you a link to it. If not, I've had luck going into the LDOE and searching I think it's called promotion guidance. Okay. So what if your system received records but cannot read them? Okay, this comes up a lot. So you have a few options here, okay? The first thing you want to do, option 1, is you want to enlist someone who has knowledge of schooling and course descriptions in the country of origin. And then that person is going to translate the transcripts. You may need to contact the sending school in order to kind of complete that translation. But again, be aware, like I mentioned before, when I was enrolling students from Iraq and Syria, we were unable to contact their home countries, their native countries, to get that information because they were claiming political asylum. So just kind of be aware of that if that is the issue. And it can just be as simple as asking the student, like, can I call your school? Especially if they're giving you transcripts, can I call your school? If you can't find somebody, okay, hold on 1 second. Christina just texted me and asked me to look at something. So what if they come? Okay, that's fine. So if they come and they have nothing from their US or their country, remember you need something to kind of guess what their age is. Like I said, that if you go to that Department of Justice letter, it gives you a bunch of options. Like I said, the one that I've had the most success is getting them to go to a clinic or something like that to get an age. I mean, if it comes down to it, ask them, and then you're going to place them according to that age. High school, like I said, is the hardest one because if they come in and they're 17 and they have no documentation, you have to basically start them in 9th grade. You can't just give them credit for something that you have no idea whether they've taken. So if they're high school age with nothing, they get put into 9th grade and they basically start there. If they're younger, So like say 13, 14, you have some flexibility. You can go ahead and enroll them into middle school. And a lot of times, like if I had a student who's 15, I would ask them, you know, like I can go ahead and start you in 9th grade, or I can send you to middle school to 8th grade, and this is what you'll learn there, or this is where I can start you here. Kind of depend on what time of year it was. If it was pretty late in the year and they had maybe just turned 15, I might send them to 8th grade, or I might go ahead and enroll them in 9th grade, depending on, you know, where they were. If they could read or write in their native language, then it might be a good thing. But yeah, if they come with nothing, it's not unreasonable to ask for something to verify age. And like I said, there are lots of different ways you can do that. You need at least that piece or an estimate of their age so you can place them according to that. The option 2, and we do have several school systems that use this, but it is not mandatory. You can go ahead and use a transcript translation service. And there is one called Validate Me that a few of our school systems are using. There is a fee associated with it. What you do not want to do is put that fee off on the parent. So the school system itself would probably want to go ahead and pay for that. My understanding is it isn't as costly as doing it like when you're a university student. To get your university transcripts translated usually runs about $1,000 or so. For the high school transcripts, my understanding is it isn't that expensive. So at least you're not doing that. The good thing about that is you'll have a little bit more consistency. If you, let's say, like I could do Spanish transcripts, but there's no way I could do Arabic or Vietnamese or Chinese transcripts. So I would have had to use a service like that. Even though I have some friends that speak those languages, some of them have not been in those countries for a very long time. So I don't know if they would necessarily have the expertise to say, yeah, this is how it is. Or like school in Egypt might be very different than school in Iraq. So it wouldn't be fair for my Egyptian friend to translate. She would just be to tell me what the courses are. She wouldn't necessarily know what they stand for or what is equal to in the US. One good thing under here is if a student earns a credit at a state or country for a class that has a Louisiana statewide assessment. So let's say biology, algebra 1, geometry, those are the 3 big ones. They really don't earn US history. If you guys are giving them credit for US history and from another country, we are going to question that. English 1 or English 2, unless they've been in a bilingual school, more than likely they have not earned the credit for those 3 courses. So those are usually ones where they do have to take it here in high school. But if they have taken them, they've earned the credit, they've passed the class, that's important. Make sure they've passed the class and actually earned the credit, then they do not have to take that assessment here. And then we do have a list of assessments. And you can click on either one of those 2 links. Now I will tell you that one thing I have noticed is sometimes I would get a student who I could award them, let's say, biology credit, right? No, I guess let's say algebra. Let's say algebra. But then they still were going to take geometry because they wanted to be on the university track. And so a lot of times what I would go ahead and do is let them take the algebra 1 test and the geometry test, even though they had already been awarded credit for it, just to kind of give them 2 opportunities to pass a test. So sometimes I would do that depending on the student and the situation. I just wanted to make sure they had as many opportunities as possible to pass those tests. But do remember that we do offer our math tests in Spanish, but we recommend that a student who takes the math test in Spanish has had some sort of formal instruction in Spanish before they take those tests. So if they've only ever received math instruction in English, it might not be the best option for them to take it in Spanish. Okay, let me make sure there's nothing hanging out in the chat. Nope, not yet. All right. So how do we assess a student's language proficiency? This is pretty easy, even if they're a SIFE. We do it with our English language proficiency screener, which is called ELPS. And we have certain criteria that they have to meet, okay? And they should have already done this before we're identifying them as a SIFE. We do have other assessments, as I've mentioned earlier, to assess their proficiency in languages other than English. If you look at the Louisiana World Languages Compendium, it lists a whole bunch of them. I mean, you can do Portuguese, Arabic, Punjabi, all sorts of the other interesting languages that are out there that might not be as common. And then of course, these are in Spanish. And I do highly recommend the ANIL by the American Reading Company to assess reading in Spanish. So that way you can tell if that student is reading at level or not, or is even literate. There are some other tests like Lost Links has a diagnostic test in Spanish that you can go ahead and give them. But it scores them just like it does the English one. It scores them in the 4 domains. But because it does assess them in reading and writing, it will let you at least know if they're like a beginner, intermediate, advanced in their native language in reading and writing. So like I said, I think that's something to let you know, hey, they are literate, so I can use things like Spanish English dictionaries and so forth to support them. Because if they're not, and you give them that and you offer that accommodation, you might as well just hand the student a brick. They can't read, they don't have the ability, they don't know how to use that tool, you're not really helping them. So it is kind of good when you can to assess their abilities in their native language. So how can a school system help SIFE if the teachers don't speak the student's language? Just like with any L, the SIFEs are going to need to receive language services in addition to support in their content classrooms. So any kind of like very low level, new to the country EL. And as I get this question all the time, like, well, I don't speak Spanish or I don't speak Arabic, how can I help these students? And that's okay. You speak the language they want to learn. You speak the main language that we are teaching them in. It comes down to knowing how to support them and how to scaffold and how to make things accessible to them. Now, SIFEs do present a few more challenges because a lot of them are coming with these academic gaps in reading and mathematics, hence why they're called students with interrupted formal education. And so that's where they may need some of that literacy instruction or some of that like beginning math skills that you may not have just readily available at a middle school or a high school. So you do kind of be aware of that. And that's why we need to know who these students are. So we're not just dropping them into an Algebra 1 class if the last time they've been in a math class was in 3rd grade. So you really want to that's partly why we're drawing attention to them. We've established criteria is to be aware that these students may need some of that additional instruction before they can access that full curriculum that we really want them to get there. You want to make sure you're using their ELP scores and any other placement tests that you are able to give them. And you'll want to use the EL instructional support plan and the EL assessment accommodations checklist to identify what kinds of supports. And like I said, this is why it's really important to know the student and know what they specifically need, because if you are getting that beginning year, brand new newcomer that is emerging, so they're level 1 on everything, and then you try to give them a placement test in math and Spanish, they weren't able to do it. You try to assess their Spanish. They could do the listening and the speaking, but they couldn't read or write. And then you go ahead and you check word-to-word dictionary on their EL assessment accommodation. That might not be the best accommodation for them simply because they don't know how to read even in their native language. So that isn't a tool that's going to help them. And remember, these can be revised yearly. So maybe he develops the skill and learns how to use the dictionary. So next year, that can be accommodation. But we really want you to be very purposeful when you're making these selections and not just checking all of the boxes. Be very purposeful and say, this is a student who's going to need this and is going to use this. This is a student who is not going to be able to use this, probably needs it, but doesn't know how to use it. This is also really important whenever you're looking at students who are coming in and have no exposure to technology. You can't just automatically plop them down onto a language program that's on the computer if they're not familiar with using it. And I think that really comes out whenever they're being assessed with ELPS, since ELPS is a computer-based assessment. If they're needing tons of assistance while trying to take that test, they're not familiar with the mouse, they're not familiar with pushing the buttons or doing anything like that, that's going to let you know. And if you're the person assessing, but not the person who's going to be instructing them, you need to let that person who's going to be instructing them know they're not comfortable with technology yet. They'll pick it up. They always do very quickly, but don't assign them right away to go ahead and start doing something on a computer, because they're probably just going to stare at it or play with the buttons for a while until they become familiar with how a computer works. I once had a student from Guatemala, and she had she had used one of the old-timey, typewriters, not even an electric typewriter, but just like the one little tick, 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 tick. And so computers were very foreign to her. She sort of just stared at them and didn't quite know what to do with it. And once we realized that was the case, we said, okay, we need to kind of go old school with her and use a lot of pencil and paper activities, a lot of one-on-one support, pull in some of her peers to help her. And her peers, they really had fun helping her. And she did pick up the technology access very quickly. And of course, that was back in the late 90s where students didn't have iPhones and so forth. So I think now it happens even faster. But back then it did take a little longer for her to get more comfortable with technology. But once she did, she was ready to roll. But it was quite traumatic for her the first time she saw one of those iMacs. We had the little blue and orange ones. And she didn't know what to do with it. She raised her hand, was asking me what it was, and is it a TV? She didn't know. So that was a very eye-opening moment for me. So how do school systems recommend a diploma pathway through SIFEs? This question comes up a lot. Let me see. Let me look at this question real quickly. My teacher. Okay, cool. Thank you, Vanessa. If you want, you can shoot me an email personally and we can talk some more. Because there's a piece of this that is very interesting to me. So please send me an email. You see my email at this end of this presentation because I'd like to continue this conversation with you, okay? All right, so a lot of schools default to putting a student, a newly enrolled high school student, on a university track. I understand why you do it. We want all students to have that opportunity. But when this is a 17-year-old student enrolling who has had little to no prior education, you really need to have this discussion. I mean, to be honest with you, we should be having a discussion with all of our students. And I think a lot of schools are, but I do get a lot of emails from people saying, but my school tells me I have to put him on the TOPS university track. And I ask, well, have you talked to him? Have you asked him what he plans to do? Have you presented him with his options? No, they won't let me. It's an automatic thing. That's kind of setting a student up for some big issues. And so we really, really want you to have this discussion with the student, with the parent or guardian. Bring in a guidance counselor, bring in the graduation coach, whoever is part of making that decision normally should be a part of this conversation. And when you want to ask them things like, what are your future plans? Do you plan to just go to work? Would you like to learn a trade? Like, would you like to get certified in welding or pipe fitting or something like that, diesel mechanics, whatever it is, let me know what you would like to do. Would you like to go to college? So if a kid comes in and tells me, I want to be a mechanical engineer. Okay, cool. And they have prior education and I see that they were killing it in math, then yes, I'm going to try everything in my power to make sure that they're on that pathway. But I'm going to let them know, you do have to learn the language because you're going to have to take these entrance exams called ACT or SAT that are very challenging, but that's okay because we're going to try to work with you to get to that point. If they tell you, I just want to go for work. I had a student who told me, look, I wasn't good at doing these classes whenever I was in Mexico. And I really just want to go to work, get a job, make money so I can sponsor my mom to come to this country. That's a pretty powerful thing. That lets me know, one, this kid is very motivated to work and make money and do what needs to be done to help his mother. I mean, how can you deny a child that? So, okay, well, let's see what the best options are for you. And so for him, we picked a different pathway than we would have with, like, let's say the kid who told me he wanted to be an engineer. Then you want to tell them, are you willing to commit to at least 4 years of attending high school? So this is a really important conversation to have with those newly enrolled high school kids. Because telling them that, some of them, yes, they're like, I'll do it. And then you might need to tell them, you're going to have to stay past the age of 18, 19. Because in Louisiana, we can. They can stay until they are 22. This can make some people feel a little uncomfortable because they're like, I'll have a 21-year-old kid walking around campus. That's okay. One, it's not usually a lot of kids. The kids are usually pretty good about not like broadcasting. They don't necessarily want everybody to know that they are that old. So they'll kind of make it seem like they're younger, and that's okay. You know, whatever it takes. For me, it was most important for them to get their education and graduate. And so if they were willing to stay that long, I'm going to keep them. They're willing to do 5 years in high school with me or to stay past the age of 18, 19 because they want to graduate. That's fine. We're going to do what needs to be done. Especially if they're coming in late. They're coming in at 17. There's no way I can get you through by the time you turn 18 or 19. There's no way you can complete high school in 1 year and achieve all the different things, pass those tests, take all the classes you need to take. So I'm going to need to have more time. Then the next question would be, how much English would you like to learn? So if I send you to an adult ed program or send you for your high set, which is available in Spanish, you're probably not going to learn a lot of English. But if learning English is one of your main goals because you do plan on going on and doing something more, or you understand that in order to be successful in this country to a certain degree, you need a good amount of English. If they understand that, then they're going to want to go ahead and enroll and stay and try to do 4 years. I've had kids who enrolled with me at like 16, 17 years old, 9th grade, and we would talk and I'd say, okay, let's try 1 year. Let's do 1 year, we'll reevaluate, we'll see where you are. And yes, some of them did leave to go take their HiSET or to go into an adult-led program. Some of them just continued to stay. So it's all about having those conversations, but being realistic and letting them know it's going to take a little longer, but if you're willing to do it, I'm willing to help you out. And that means a lot to students for you to say that to them and not just push them out, not just say, oh, I don't want you here. I'm sorry, you can't be here. Never say those things. First of all, it's a violation of civil rights. You can present them with those options. Like if they are 17 and they're saying, look, I want to go to work right away. No, I don't really care about learning English because I'm going to work in construction with my father and my uncles, and they all speak Spanish anyways. Okay, no problem. Well, there is this option. You could go HiSET, take the test, pass it, whatever. But I highly recommend that you get something. That's what I would tell kids. Like you've got to get something. You've either got to get that diploma or you got to get that HiSET. Those are your two options, and these are the pathways to them. Okay, I can give you a diploma with some trade. If you want to go to college, you need this. I mean, those are the kinds of conversations that you need to be having with these students as they select their graduation pathway. And yes, they can go for a career diploma. There are some certifications that you might have some issues with them taking because some of them do require social security numbers. So if these students don't have social security numbers, there are some that particularly in the medical field, there are some that require social security numbers. And so it might be hard for them to take those tests. But a lot of the others, they can use their LACIDs, they can use 000s. We at the state, we're not the ones who govern that. It is the agencies that award those certifications. So that's why those stipulations are there, and we're not able to get them to change that. Because in order to earn that certification, like I said, the medical ones are the big ones because they require a background check for a lot of them, not all of them, but just kind of be aware that for some of these, they may not be able to earn certain certifications. But I will say that I personally was able to get a lot of students through on career diplomas with certain certifications like welding and pipe fitting and various other things of that nature without any problems. Okay, medical was the only one where I ran into issues, though that is one that I did have some students who were very interested in doing it. When they had the social security numbers, no problem. When they didn't, we needed to have additional conversations. So just be prepared, be aware that that may come up. So what if a SIFE will turn 19 before they meet graduation requirements? That's okay. It's all right. They don't have to leave when they turn 19. Remember, we are placing them according in their age-appropriate grade, high school being where it gets a little tricky. If they are 16 or older, they must be enrolled at a high school. So please do not be sending these 16-year-olds to a middle school. I have encountered that. You don't want to do that. Automatically, they have to be in high school. 14, 15 years old, you might want to have conversations with them, depending on what time of year it is, things like that, whether you want to put them in 8th grade or go ahead and start them in 9th grade or T9. Ls can remain enrolled until they turn 22. Yes, many will not want to. They'll be like, no, peace out, I'm out of here. And that's okay. But you know that they can. And I have had a lot of students willing to stay. I had a girl who was married with 2 children who was willing to stay, and she graduated with me. And that was pretty cool. It was very cool at her graduation for her to have her 2 children with her and her husband and her very large extended family. And she stayed and graduated and then turned 22. It was lovely. It was wonderful. And I did have other students like that. So just be aware of that it is an option and that's something you can talk to them about. And like I said, I would tell them, we won't emphasize your age unless, that's up to you if you want to tell people how old you are. I won't tell them, meaning other students. But what usually happens is when you start getting a good mix in, it stops being such a big deal. It really does. Like it sort of just becomes just the way it is and everybody moves on. So for students who will turn 19 before completing graduation requirements, they can be presented with these options, okay? You can remain enrolled in school until age determined by the school, so 20, 21, 22, whatever, to learn more English and transfer to an adult education program. They can begin an adult education program. So if they are turning 19 and they're like, I don't want to stay till I'm 22, you can say, okay, how about an adult education program? Or they can simply, like I said, stay, continue going to school past 19. And like I said, I have had 20, 21-year-olds with me. And what I have found is a lot of times when students are that old, not mature, and they're in school, they're very dedicated and they're motivated and they're going to do what needs to be done to get through and finish. So something kind of happens when they're making that commitment, because it truly is like their choice to stay. They will bust their butts to get through and to do what needs to be done. So it's a pretty cool thing. And it's a great option that we have because most of them come from countries where this isn't even a consideration. Okay. Now we're gonna do some little breakout sessions. We're gonna look at some student samples. I'm gonna give you a little introduction here in just a second. So we're gonna break into smaller groups and discuss a few student examples. So let me go ahead and give you guys a little introduction on this. So you're gonna be reading 3 student examples. We have Ricardo, Fad, and David, okay? And you're gonna be looking at those in your breakout rooms. We'll be coming back and kind of sharing out and talking about some things. While you're reading these samples, is you're going to be thinking about how would you support or help others support these students as they acquire English and learn the content. So all 3 of these are, of course, students who would be identified as SIFEs. And they're all coming with interesting situations, circumstances. I give you various kind of information you would need to know, like their ELPS scores, and their prior education, whether or not they're comfortable with technology, because those are all things you really want to know before you determine what the support is. So Christina, do you want to give them some information about how to do the breakouts?
Okay, so can we show the student examples before we go to the breakout rooms? Because I
Sure.
can't.
You want me to show all 3 or one at a time?
Let's do one, and then we'll do a breakout room, and then we'll come back to the main room and do the second one, and then the third one.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so the first one is Ricardo. He's age 15 from Honduras. He attended school for 4 years before leaving to help mom with work. Mom was then killed, and he went to live with his uncle. A gang tried to recruit him, so his uncle paid a coyote to smuggle him to the US, where he would live with his father, who he had never met. He scored emerging on ELPS and was unable to complete either of the state placement tests, even Spanish math. So none of it felt familiar to him. They gave him the 8th grade math placement test and he wasn't able to do any of it. None of it was familiar to him, even in his own language. So as we break off into our little groups, think about what types of academic and language supports Ricardo will need to be successful in school.
Okay, I'm going to put you in groups of about 10. And there's going to be a timer and it'll push you back to this main room after 5 minutes. All right, here we go.
Okay, it looks like we're back. Is that correct? I think everybody's coming back.
Yes,
Break
everybody's
out.
back at this time.
Sorry, we aren't able to, unless I'm in the breakout room, we're not able to share the screen. So you'll have to kind of maybe snap a picture with your phone or jot down some notes. I'm sorry about that. For our other sessions. I mean, because we have 2 more student examples to talk about. So would anybody like to put in the chat or anywhere maybe some ideas for how to help Ricardo or, okay, so good. So in my breakout group, they said that to get a counselor in, definitely. So anticipating that Ricardo is going to need some additional help beyond just academics, which that is also a big obstacle that we face with a lot of students who are coming in with this interrupted formal education, particularly if they're coming in from situations like Ricardo, where they've had to deal with some very big trauma. And that can be challenging to make sure that you have these kinds of services available in their language. He'll definitely need, okay, so one person says he'll need an EL para, so I'm assuming meaning he's going to need somebody taught in both languages. Here we have some majors taught in both languages. Okay, that's interesting. Peer groups, yeah, peer groups, and not just somebody who speaks Spanish to work with him. You can also just get a very patient English speaker to work with him. I actually prefer that over putting the pressure on a student who speaks Spanish. Use sentence stems, yeah, when speaking to the student, use pictures and videos. Pictures and videos, I mean, that's the great thing about having all the technology that we have, even in the distance learning environment, is we do have access to some of that, and we can make it available. iPad for translating. Okay, yeah, show them how to do that. Like spend a little time, you know, during a PE class or something like that to show him how to use a translator. Make sure that he's doing the translating though and not somebody else for him. Maybe at the very beginning, like the first week or so, but after that, it's really important that they learn that school. Donnell is asking if he would be placed in high school or 8th grade. Like I said, if it was me enrolling this student, I would talk to him. More than likely, I would go ahead and put him in transition 9, the T9, and get him some of them like those reading classes and like that technical writing class or whatever else is available on campus. And then if I had a good amount of students like Ricardo, I would probably do an ES only or like a newcomer class. I did have that when I was teaching here, and I put all of my brand new babies in like my 4th block. And we worked a lot on grammar and vocabulary and things like that, some of those basic skills. Yeah, partner a student with another student. Yeah, and like I said, don't always go right for the student who speaks Spanish, because that puts a lot of pressure on that kid to translate everything. And if they grew up here, went to school here, they may not know how to say a lot of the stuff that's being taught in Spanish. And then you're basically asking them to become a bilingual educator. Now, using those students to like give directions of like where the cafeteria is, or, you know, like, hey, you need to wear a belt. That's not so bad. Work with the EL on how to utilize the resources he has available for building his confidence. Yeah, like show him those tools, show him things, try to figure out what his strengths are. I have found that a lot of times when language is a barrier, that these kids will suddenly become really good artists and be able to draw things really well, or they'll be good at acting. Like I typically speak a lot with my hands. I use a lot of facial expressions because I'm used to working with people who don't speak English as their first language. Make sure the teacher is aware of the student background and what the ELF scores are and what they mean. Provide strategies to teachers. Yeah, let them know like a lot of the things you're doing, like a lot of the small group instruction, a lot of those visuals, things, videos, anything like that that you're using is going to help him. So let's give him the opportunity, and let's not like, you know, water it down so much, maybe a little bit, but not the whole thing. Yeah, Carla, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, a student who spoke Arabic to help another. Yeah, that was probably the concern that I had received the most when I was an ESL teacher, was so-and-so's asking me to teach. And I don't know how to say those things. And kids that would come in who weren't L's, but spoke the language, would like seek me out and say, the science teacher's asking me to translate everything, and I don't know how to do it. And I don't even understand this stuff. So yeah, it puts a lot of pressure. I mean, it's different, like I said, if it's like, where's the cafeteria, or, you know, where's the bathroom, that kind of stuff. More non-English speaking students and parents, what did the school What did the school do during school program? What did the school do during? Yeah, Google Translate is hard. I think if they're doing like one-on-one words, it's not so bad. When they're trying to do like entire text, that's when things get very messy. It's very cute though when they're trying to translate like an idiom and they're doing it like the whole thing and it doesn't translate. That's hard. Figurative language is very hard to run through Google Translate, but that might be one of those skills that you could have somebody work on with him, or if you're the specialist that you work with him on, is like, what does this actually mean? Just like in Spanish, we have more than one meaning for things. In English, we really do. So kind of talk about those things. Okay, good. Let's go ahead and move on to the next student example. Marlon, if you could email me maybe your question, I don't think I understand it. So maybe just email me privately and we can talk more about that. Interactive musical slides are extremely helpful. Yeah, music helps a lot. It really does. That was actually one of my rules, is if they were doing something and they could listen to music while they were working on it or whatever, it had to be either electronic, no words at all, or it had to be in English. And I would like literally go around and listen to their little headphones to make sure, like, because it's hard to listen in Spanish and be trying to think in English. I know this, I do it all the time. I have to make sure I am not listening to my reggaeton whenever I'm trying to do English emails. It doesn't work. Okay. All right, go to the next student example. So this is Fad. Okay, and Fad is age 16 from Iraq. Now I have a little asterisk on here because mentioned earlier, remember I mentioned that we received like this little group of students from Iraq. They were all refugees coming in claiming political asylum. And we received documentation. And then as the school year went on and we had conversations with these kids, there were about 8 of them that came, 2 different families. We learned that they were actually a lot older than the documentation. Like Fad, I think, was probably about between 22 and 24. At the time that I taught him, he was telling me all about the first Desert Storm. And so that's when we started like kind of asking more questions, but we had already enrolled him. The documentation that we had said he was 16. So we just went based on that. And I will tell you that he graduated. He did everything he needed to do. So he moved here with his parents and 10 siblings from an area of Baghdad. Says he had attended school but has no records. So he came in no records. And it was one of the situations where we could not contact his prior place because of safety. We couldn't find family members. You know, their lives had been threatened. Their father, I think he was a translator and had been helping the US military. So it was literally, we cannot call anybody, we cannot do anything. So he told me that, but we still went ahead and enrolled him into 9th grade and went with the documentation. He scored emerging on ELPS, but he was comfortable with technology. So he was very comfortable using computers, didn't have any problem with that. And he was also one of the first Muslim students that we had at the high school where I was teaching at that time. Well, after that, we continuously got a pretty regular, to the point where we had like little areas where they could go and pray. You know, we set up certain things. So during Ramadan, they didn't have to go into the cafeteria to eat. So we definitely, you know, started to work more with those students and provide better services and support for them in relation to their culture. But with FAD, what types of academic and language supports would FAD need to be successful in school? And I will tell you that we did not assess his Arabic abilities, but he was like, little things like dictionaries and stuff that he had no problem. So he definitely demonstrated that he was literate in his language. So that helped. So let's go ahead and this time when you get into your things, like I said, take a little shot with your phone or write down some little notes somewhere. So that way when you get into your breakout rooms, you guys can kind of have these conversations. So Christina, you want to go ahead and set up the next breakout room?
All right, here we go.
Thank you.
And Miss Garcia, it's totally up to you. If you want to go to like a room or 2 and just be bounced around, just shoot me a text and I can move you from one to another.
Okay. Yeah, I just declined going into one because when I was in the last one, everybody was just quiet. I was like, I don't know what to do. I tried talking to them, but hopefully they're talking to each other. So is my manage participant button like it's dropping so much because they're going into the breakouts, or are they just leaving?
No, they're going into the breakout room, so it'll drop, and then when they all come back in, it'll go back up.
Okay.
I'm getting pretty good at these breakout rooms, I've got to say. So now when you were in your breakout room, was your share screen able to be shared with them in the breakout room?
It was. So I was like, I'm giving them an unfair advantage. Yes. I hit share because I was like, oh, maybe that'll go to everybody. And that was when I was asking you. And then they're like, oh, cool, we can see it now. I was like, oh, nobody else can.
Yeah, the only option I have when they're in breakout rooms is to broadcast a message out to everyone in every breakout room, but I can't share like a picture or a file or anything.
Okay.
So it is limited.
Are you preparing for the storm?
Like this. I'm crossing my fingers.
Yeah. I'm just hoping it's just wind and rain like normal and we'll be okay.
Exactly. We live about 10 miles from the coast now, and I mean, hopefully we'll be okay. We live we're pretty high, so.
Okay, good. It's a pretty area down there though. I like it.
Oh, it's gorgeous. And I take the beach to go to work every morning, and it adds an extra 5 minutes, but it's so worth it.
Worth it, yeah. I keep my stepdad was in the Marines, and I tell him that if he gets to a point where we have to put him somewhere, he's going in the military retirement home there because it's beautiful. It looks out, on the ocean, and I'm like, that's where you're going. He's from Mississippi, so he's okay with that.
I'm actually a transplant from Connecticut. My husband was in the military and moved me down here. He's actually from Slidell.
Oh, okay. I had to lock up my dogs, like on the other side of the house.
Mine are outside right now. Okay, so breakout rooms just got a notification that they have about 60 more seconds, then they'll be pushed into this room.
All right, I'll keep the chat open so I can see what they say.
Was the tip that I gave you as far as the PowerPoint, was that
Yes.
how you were able? Okay.
Yeah, that was how I was able to get the chat. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, appreciate it.
No
I was like, I can't see the chat. It won't let me.
I actually watched a YouTube video about it this morning. Glad I was able to use it.
Yeah, it worked because I can see everybody's things now.
Good.
So it should be rolling back in, right? Yep.
Yeah.
Looks like they are.
So I'm going to go ahead and mute and turn my video off.
Okay. All right, welcome back, everybody, as you're making your way back into the main room. We'll talk about how we can help FAD, like what kinds of ideas you guys came up with. Ooh, it's fun to watch the participant number just jump. Like, all right, so what kinds of academic and language supports do you think FAD is going to need in order to be successful or access? Do these SIFE students have or need to have an IEP? That there is that possibility, right? Just like with any of our Ls, there's always a possibility that they need to go through that. What I find is if they're not coming with like documentation or previous information letting us know, what I find is that first year, a lot of times it's hard to identify, especially if they have that limited, because the question is, did they just never learn how to learn, or is there a learning disability? And I say that it takes about 6 months to a year sometimes to identify on these kids whether it's something else. And a lot of times it has to do with they're just simply not making progress. All the supports that I'm giving them, they're still not able to access. And I still couldn't be able to test them in their native language. So yeah, there may be some, out of the 3 that I'm showing you, Ricardo was one. He had a different name when I had him. I changed the names on these, but Ricardo was one who he needed to go through that process. There was definitely some other issues because he simply wasn't progressing. Like each year that he took, first he was with Elda and then ELPS and whatever, but he just never progressed in acquiring language. So he needed to go through the process. Fad, no, he progressed pretty quickly, actually. Okay, so let's talk about what kinds of good stuff you guys came up with. How the teacher used Khan Academy for the students to utilize in his laptop in his language so he's able to participate in class. Yeah, and Fad, since he's so comfortable with technology, he's probably gonna be pretty good. Now, noticing that he's one of the first Muslims, he was one of the first Arabic speaking students as well. So it's not like we could bring in, like a student to do that, which I'm not a big fan of that anyways. So he really had to be paired up with kids that spoke English. Let's see, uses strength, since he was good with technology. Yeah, that does open up some other options for him. And then it says, oh good, provide or enhance cultural sensitivity training and discussions among students. Yeah, that did come up. Fad was, I'll share this with you all, he was jumped on the bus about 2-3 months into school. He was jumped and a couple kids roughed him up really bad, and it was a very sad situation. And we called in his parents and had a conversation with him because his dad was extremely upset because he's like, look, I left my country because we didn't want to go through this. And then I come here and my child gets jumped on a bus because he's Arabic. And it was a hard thing, but luckily he felt really safe, in my classroom and some of the other teachers' classrooms. We did start to have more students. We had, it was interesting because he was in my ESL class and him and I had 2 or 3 other students from Iraq who spoke Arabic, but I had, kids from Vietnam and a lot of kids from Mexico, from Central America, South America. They all kind of banded together because even though they didn't speak the same language, they were all kind of in the same situation where it's like, we're trying to learn, we're older, we don't know what's going on. And they started kind of looking out for each other and helping him out because a lot of the Spanish speaking kids, there was already a community established there. So they kind of had, like, they had their grocery stores, they had their markets, they had a community where the newly arrived Iraqi kids and Iraqi families didn't, but they kind of embraced them. And it was a really cool thing. And then I had some kids from Sudan and places like that where they also speak Arabic, but it's a different kind of Arabic. And, but they're also Muslim. So those kids, when they came later, kind of banded with my Iraqi Arabic kids and became really good friends, started supporting each other and doing things like that. So I like the cultural sensitivity. Yeah, we just need to talk about it, like the Ramadan stuff, because we used to have a rule where you couldn't leave the cafeteria once you went in. Well, we had to change that rule because when they're fasting, is it really fair to have them sit in the cafeteria? Okay, good. Manipulate to his advantage because he's tech savvy. We need to reach out to the Muslim community for support. I think it's for that one, it's just really knowing what kinds of things I should be aware of, like the different religious holidays or certain expectations. Assess the technology to his advantage and having an inclusion teacher within the gen ed classroom. Yeah, he was much better in a push-in situation. He sometimes, would just need a little bit more time. I mean, I didn't speak Arabic and I still supported this child, each year that I had him. And he picked it up very quickly. One idea is to have the cafeteria staff make sure to identify foods like pork. Yeah, that actually did start to happen after we got these Muslim students, as they started identifying it on the menu, right? Because yeah, they don't always know, they don't have the language to ask, but it would literally come like, we'll put the menu up and it would say pork. Okay. Yeah, preparing spaces for prayer. Like I said, within a year, we had it kind of established where they could go and pray. And the bad thing is then sometimes they would just come hang out because I'm like, this is the cool safe spot. No, I'm supposed to be your prayer space. Use the parental support to help him as well, due to the fact that his father was a translator. Yeah, his father actually spoke good English. That was one advantage for us. It was much easier to engage him. And his father was like at the school all the time, asking tons and tons of questions. And I think he just felt really safe doing that with us. And after FAD was jumped, Fowler was regularly at the school. Check into community groups that may have similar backgrounds to socialize with. Yeah. Develop an individual plan or IEP to address gaps, needs, and ID supports. So we couldn't really do an IEP for him, but we could do, the personal needs profile or something like that. We could do one of these other ones because until he goes through, that process with the SBLC and so forth, we can't really take that step, but we can definitely, there are other kinds of plans that we can establish for FAD and goals and so forth. Because for him, it really was just about learning the English, acclimating to school in the US, and then just kind of making, like many of you pointed out, making kids aware that, yes, now we have Arabic Muslim students and that is really cool. And so are his sisters, and let's talk about it. All right, one more. Okay, and this is going to be David. So there we go. So he is 17 from Mexico. So he arrives at the age of 17. He has some school records, but they appear to only go up to 9th grade. Okay. So he's not been in school for about 3 to 4 years. Scored emerging in ELPS, but was able to do some of the Spanish math tests and likes numbers. So he likes math, which bless him, right? And he's eager to enter the workforce and says he doesn't like school in general. So think about him, like I said, either take a shot of this with your phone or jot down some notes. We've got his age there. We do have interrupted, but he appears to be literate enough that he is able to access the Spanish math test. Okay, so that gives us some information. So let's go ahead, Christina, you want to set up the last breakout room for us?
All right, here we go.
I'm gonna go ahead and join the breakout room.
Participants were just given their 60 seconds of timer.
Okay, cool. We're almost done, so perfect timing. All right, it looks like people are making their way back into the main session. Thank you for staying with us this entire time.
Okay, everyone should be pushing in now.
Okay, cool. There goes that number back up. All right, so let's talk about how we would support David. In one of the breakout rooms, I saw a lot of things about maybe, kind of putting him on a career path and doing things like work studies. So he does a couple academic classes half the day, and then the other half of the day he's learning a trade, especially because he's saying he's eager to enter the workforce. He doesn't like school. So go ahead and kind of get him in a situation where he's learning at least that trade and building at least some English. Good. And asking, talk about his desire to speak English and want to learn a trade, like maybe what trade it is, because certain trades might require more English than others. Then he can earn his high cent vocation. Yeah, then maybe he does go into one of those programs. Provide counsel with the various career paths. Yeah, let them know, what do you actually need to do? If you want to go work at a plant and, be a welder at a plant and make really good money, awesome, but this is what you're going to need to do. You need to have at least a high set or a high school diploma, right? And I need you to know a little bit of English. And then if you have the trade, you have these certifications, it's going to make it easier for you to find jobs. Okay, if you have a dual enrollment program that goes all the way up to those ages, I don't know of any. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm thinking dual enrollment. Sorry, you're probably talking more like the other kinds of programs. I was thinking Spanish English program. Ignore me. Sorry. Communicate with the student about his future goals and suggest adult education and career paths and let him know about all the other. Yeah, just give them their options. Don't bully them into taking that, but saying, hey, since you don't like school, you're really eager to enter the workforce. Here's how you can get into the workforce faster. If not, I'm gonna need you to give me 4 or 5 years. But since he's 17, we're gonna be very close to where we're gonna have to let him out. So it might be, or maybe it is stay for a year. Let's do that. Yeah, join a jumpstart pathway, so you can finish even quicker. Yeah, he doesn't have quite as many of those really rigorous academic courses like physics and algebra 2 and stuff like that he has to take. He likes numbers, but maybe he just likes them up until a certain point. Support the career pathway he appears to prefer, encourage him to continue education in the future and using math skills, engineering possibilities. Yeah, let him know you can do this now. There's community colleges. I mean, that's one of the absolutely wonderful things about the United States is we have a lot of different kind of education opportunities that are available. It's not just you have to go to 4-year college. You can do these other things as well and still make a very good living. Okay, good. Yeah, I continue. David, and when I worked with him, he had a hard time with word problems, but once I wrote the word problem out, gave him the math from the problem, he could do it. He corrected my math all the time. It was really just how wordy word problems are. It was language for him. He struggled with the language. So, but once we were able to kind of simplify the math, or at least I would write out the math problem for him, he would do it without hesitation. So he was very comfortable with doing those kinds of things. Yeah, and actually David, he did. I will tell you, he was one of my students. He only stayed with me for a year, and then he came back and was like, okay, I'm ready to try to go do this high set thing. I'm working construction and making a good living, and I want to do that. So he went to night school. But it was very good to work with him for a year and to kind of see, where he was and to give him a little bit of an exposure to English and an opportunity to become familiar with culture here in the US. All right. Thank you so much for that. So we already did our share out. Specialized supports. I mean, you guys came up with some different things that I think hopefully the piece that you all are taking away from this is that we know these students are there. We need to identify these students, and then we need to figure out what is the best pathway for them. We're not going to automatically put them on one. We're going to talk to them and see what they truly want to do. I think when we start doing more of that, we're going to lose less of these students. They're not going to be as quick to drop out because, like, okay, these people care about me. They really want to help me make the best decisions for my future. And because I'm here in the United States, I do have options. And so let me find out what those are. And a lot of David had no problem like backbreaking work in like Louisiana summer. It didn't bother him. It really didn't. He was more interested in working. He really just didn't want to sit in a classroom and deal with kids because, I mean, he'd already been dealing with a lot of things from where he came from. He'd already been working. He'd already been kind of being an adult. And so he was a student who definitely excelled whenever we put him on the correct pathway for him. So next steps is you're going to follow the procedures for identifying SIFEs and making program placement decisions. So having those conversations, providing them with options, using our new criteria, which is available in this presentation, as well as the SIFE one-pager that is available on the English Learner website. Individualized instruction. Some are not all SIFEs are the same. Some will want to stay and do all the work and go to university and everything like that. If you have a high number of SIFEs, you might consider adding a newcomer program or an intensive English program, or having classes that do ESL instruction. So that's an actual class, not necessarily a pull-out, but an actual class where they're receiving credit or something like that, where they're being taught some of those foundational skills as well as some of the other things. I mean, a lot of times whenever I had the opportunity to teach that, I would pull stuff from the guidebooks and use a lot of those strategies and so forth, because a lot of those things are there. Why not use them? I would just make them a little bit more accessible to my students. And if you do have staff that could provide bilingual education, that's awesome. It's just we know that in most cases, we're just providing translation services and it's not being done as purposefully, so it's not being as effective. If we're only just translating everything for the student and then providing it to them in the other language, but not really building anything, we're not really building their Spanish and we're certainly not building their English, that's where it becomes a problem. We think we're helping them, but we're actually hindering them by not building their Spanish and then, of course, not building their English. When you get these sites, please make them feel welcomed and wanted. You know, don't the moment they walk in be like, no, you can't be here. You've got to go to Delgado. You've got to go to BRCC or RPCC. No. Say, okay, hi, yeah, I would love to have you. Let's talk about your options. And these are the commitment you're going to need to make. And then my last slide is our resources. Of course, you got the website, the one-pager. USED is United States Education Department. They have a newcomer 2 kit. We have some really good resources and information in there. And then there's my one-pager of how to support. Sorry, that's an article from Colorado, that last thing, okay? So feel free to email me, take a picture of that or write it down if you have questions, comments, concerns, anything like that. If you have a weird situation pop up with a student and you're not sure if they're a SIFE or what you should do, call me. I mean, I've done crazy things. I've had people send me transcripts to look at and say, like, what should we do with this kid? So I'm more than happy. I'm very passionate about supporting these students and want to make sure that we're all doing what's best for them. And thank you for the time. You have one more thing that Christina is going to talk to you about.
Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us today. And we do ask that you log on to the Sketch app and rate this session. We appreciate all the feedback that we get. And we thank Alice Garcia for putting this on for us. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And be sure to do the feedback. I'll put my email address in the chat as well to everyone in case you guys need it, okay? Thank you and stay safe this weekend, everybody, from the storm. Or Monday, whatever decides to come visit us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.